I'm on the phone with Sam Pandelis, who is the second place finisher in the Masters division of the video game competition at this year's World Championships. So, Sam, first of all, where are you from, and how did you get into Pokemon?
Hi, Stephen. I'm from Australia. I live in Melbourne, and I first got into Pokemon Pokemon in general, that dates back almost 20 years ago, and when we all played Red and Blue and stuff like that. Competitively, I never really knew there was much of a competitive scene for Pokemon until about 2011, and that's when I just stumbled across a tournament that was happening at one of the local GameStops, and I just walked in there and I saw a tournament was going on, and I was just curious, and then since then I just made friends and never looked back, I guess.
Great little backstory there. I had a chance to visit Melbourne, of course, earlier this year when I had a very great opportunity to go to the internationals there. So for this year's World Championships, you had the usual team of 6 Pokemon. You chose, according to my records, Tapu Lele, Arcanine, Ninetales, Garchomp, Mandibuzz, and Xurkitree. Now, a couple of those are pretty standard choices, but there are a couple of very interesting ones there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the rarest one, but one of the important ones, Ninetales. What was that sort of serving on the team?
So Ninetales was there for a few reasons. First, it held the Light Clay, which meant it can extend Aura Veil by 3 turns, giving it 8 in turns instead of 5. The thing about the Ninetales, which was really strange, was that it had no special attack investment at all. It was fully defensive. And so in that sense, all it did was provide a supporting role to the team. It didn't have any offensive pressure at all. The moves were just Icy Wind, Disable, Roar, and Aura Veil. So the point of Ninetales was just to help your teammates, and it didn't have any attacking prowess at all.
Yeah, not really. Now, let's see. A second one I want to talk about was Mandibuzz, which is, the vulture Pokemon. That had some interesting utility uses in there. How did that sort of fit in?
So I chose Mandibuzz on my team it was kind of like a meta call at the time because I felt there'd be a lot of Metagross at Worlds, and Mandibuzz is very, very good against Metagross. It deals with it very nicely with Foul Play. It also supports the team with speed control with Tailwind, and you can also taunt things, which prevents Celesteelers from setting up leech seeds and stuff like that.
Yeah, Taunt is, very good against anything that is, not a heavy attacker. Very defensive Pokemon that tend to have a lot of status moves, always good there. And then you have one Ultra Beast on your team, and that's Xurkitree. What made you choose that one for this tournament?
So basically Xurkitree, and the whole team in general is a bunch of mid-speed tier Pokemon. You have the Adamant Garchomp, the Arcanine, Lele, Xurkitree. So when you have supporting moves like Icy Wind on the Ninetales and Bulldoze on the Arcanine and Tailwind on the Mandibuzz, you can very often get Xurkitree into a good speed control, outspeed your opponent, I guess you could say. And Xurkitree actually has the highest base special attack out of any Pokemon for this format. And it's just a really, really heavy hitter. And I felt like I needed it to deal with the outsurge of Celesteelers and generally just bulky water types like Tapu Fini in general. And it was pretty instrumental for dealing with the team.
Yeah, we definitely saw that. Now, you did relatively well throughout the tournament, obviously, making it to the finals. There you had to face Ryota from Japan. He had a team, very well-known player. He had a Crocodile, Whimsicott, Tapu Fini, Marowak, Celesteela, and Tapu Koko. Now, the interesting thing is if you compare that to your teams have no Pokemon in common, which is pretty rare. Do you think that says more about the two of you as players, or do you think it says something about the Sun and Moon games in this format? Any sort of comment there?
I think it says a lot about the format in general. I think us as players, in the past formats, we've used teams that have been pretty similar. I know Ryota in 2015 was using Chalk, which was the most standard team of that year. This year was a lot more diverse, and just outside me and Ryota, the top 8 of the World Championships this year featured the most unique Pokemon in history compared to any previous year. So more than anything, I would just say the format was diverse and allowed for a lot of different Pokemon to shine.
Is there anything in particular you attribute to that? Is there something about the Pokemon introduced in Sun and Moon or anything like that?
I feel like nothing too overpowered was legal, and in terms of that, Mega Evolutions were also not legal, which opened a lot more potential for other Pokemon to shine, because generally in the past formats there was only 2 or 3 Megas that would be considered viable. But without Megas this year, it just gave pretty much every Pokemon that wasn't a Mega a chance to fit in on a team. I think that's why the Pokemon were diverse.
Okay, well, let's go into the finals itself. So it did go to 3 games. You came up sort of on the short end there, but let's start with game 1.
Yep.
So you mentioned, Auroraville, and you did set that up very quickly in that game. You really tried to do that in all of the games, pretty much. Was that basically what your goal then, and you felt that would serve you well against Ryota's team?
Yeah, because if you looked at team matchup, I really had a pretty bad matchup against Ryota. Like, my main hitters like Xurkitree and Garchomp, for example, and he has the Marowak and the Tapu Fini. So, and Celesteela, and Celesteela is really good against Garchomp because Garchomp can't really hit it, for example. So I didn't really have the good matchup on paper, especially because of the Marowak, because without the Marowak, Xurkitree kind of hits everything pretty nicely. But because of that, I felt like I need to have Garchomp on the field as soon as possible, just to set up Swords Dance or get Tectonic Rage onto the Marowak if necessary. But yeah, Auraville was pretty instrumental, and also the fact he had Brick Break on his Marowak, which is really not a common move at all, just was kind of detrimental to my team.
Yeah, we definitely saw that in Game 2. Actually, I think several times in Game 2. I don't know if we saw it in Game 3, but that was definitely one of the things about Game 2. He was able to just sort of knock out the Auroraville on Ninetales there and basically, just take you back to regular defense. Now, I noticed in the second game you did try and reset that up, and he just broke it again. What kind of happened there?
By that turn, I think I predicted the Marowak to protect. I made a few mistakes in the game, because there was a point where I could have won the second game if I clicked Earthquake, but I went for a Swords Dance instead on my Garchomp. If I'd clicked Earthquake, I would have won the game, but I got a bit greedy, I guess, and I predicted him to protect or maybe Charm with his Whimsicott, and then he made the read and he got back into the game.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things you can, strategize around. Is you can sometimes play too conservatively or too aggressively, and that's always a tough decision to make, especially at the top levels. One interesting move that we really didn't see competitively too often before is that during the second game you were able to use Disable against a Pokemon with a choice item, specifically Tapu Fini on Ryota's side. That was kind of interesting. How often do you get to do that as a course of normal gameplay, do you think?
I actually use Disable quite a lot in the tournament, which is funnily enough. Basically, the thought process behind Disable is I have 3 setup Pokemon. I have Tail Glow on Xurkitree, Swords Dance on Garchomp, and Calm Mind on Tapu Lele. Basically, what Disable does is if you have one of those Pokemon next to you, you can disable a move that's preventing you from setting up from the opponent, and then you can just get like a free Tail Glow or a free Swords Dance off. And I was able to do that quite a lot during the tournament.
Yeah, and like I said, not enough to get you a victory, but it did work. You did see it work once in Game 2 in the finals. Like I said, it has always been to me such like a sort of a joke move, like a proof of concept, but never really useful. But that is kind of interesting that we finally see it in competitive.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about the third game. Ryota was able to force a third game, and he did pick this one up. Now, initially, it actually looked like you were doing quite well. You had gotten to a point where he had actually was using his Z move on turn 1 with the Whimsicott Prankster, which you switched into a Dark Pokemon, which as of the new games does sort of nullify that. At that point, did you think you kind of had it, or what was your mental state there when you pulled that off?
I was pretty happy when I put it up because I knew it looks like really good to the crowd and got everyone hyped and excited. I didn't think I had it at that point though because basically I was in a bad spot when he led Whimsicott again. I predicted him not to lead Whimsicott, and in hindsight, I probably should have brought Tapu Lele in the back. But I knew that when he didn't lead Tapu Fini, that it was going to come in and he'll just go straight for the Garchomp. So I had to switch Mandibuzz in there. But the issue was I had Ninetales and Mandibuzz out in the field. Doesn't really offer any kind of offensive pressure at all. But then after that, I was able to maneuver into a better position later, but it just didn't work out, I guess.
Yeah, you didn't quite make it there. I mean, it was a very memorable finals and definitely worth watching. If you haven't seen it already, I would say dig it up on, I think it's probably on the Pokemon Twitch channel, or you can find it on YouTube. It's one of the best worlds just overall in terms of finals matches. I think we got some really good stuff there, and you should definitely be proud of yourself for making it that far. That being said, you mentioned a few things here or there. Anything you would do differently team-wise if you had to do this over again?
Team-wise, no, I think my team was fine. But the issue with Game 3 was mostly Game 2 and Game 3, I just got really greedy and I went for setup moves. Like, I went for Tail Glow in Game 3 instead of I could have just Dazzling Gleamed and knocked out the Whimsicott at an earlier stage. Because due to me not doing that, it came down to the very last turn where I had to protect one of my Pokemon. It was basically a 50-50. If I called it right, I probably would have won. If I called it wrong, I lost. And he called it right, so I lost.
Yeah, he double moonblasted Xurkitree, guessing that you were going to protect your Garchomp there, and that led him to seal the deal there, unfortunately.
That's right.
All the same, great job. We are just right now starting a new season of competition. There are some things coming up. What are you looking forward to in the next game season? Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon don't come out till November, so we don't really know what's going to happen there since the first Internationals is still going to be using the original Sun and Moon. What are you looking forward to this season, though?
Well, I'll be in attendance at London, so I'll have to be playing VGC 17 again. I wouldn't be running the same team because everyone knows what it does, so I'm still team building for what I could use there. In terms of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, though, which I believe the new format will start on December 1st. I'm hoping we get Megas allowed again, just because I think it's be a bit different to what we had this year. I'm kind of worried that Landorus will kind of like surge and take over the format. So if we had Megas, I might think it might even be a bit more diverse than without Megas, just due to all the Pokemon being available.
Yeah, it is always that balancing act. Sometimes adding a larger pool actually constricts things more if you're not careful. So we'll see what happens once the new games become legal late this year or early next. All right. Well, you do some social media type activities. Why don't you talk a little bit about those? You got a Twitter, right?
Yeah, I have a Twitter that essentially the whole Pokemon VGC community resides on Twitter. So if anyone's looking to get into the scene for VGC, definitely check out Twitter. You got all the world champions have Twitter. My one's Zelda VGC. You got the previous world champion, Wolf Glick. You got the world champion before that. You got the 3-time world champion, Ray Rizzo. All frequently update and post updates on Twitter. And they're very friendly, so everyone talks to everyone on the community. So I recommend anyone looking to get into the scene to just follow people on Twitter, have a chat.
All right. Yeah, that's one thing I'll definitely give to Pokemon on both sides is that TCG and VGC is that they have some of the nicest, best people you'll ever have the pleasure of meeting. All right. Well, thank you very much, Sam. Been great having you on.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
This has been Stephen Reich from the Pokepress Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. On the phone with Sam from Australia, the runner-up in the Masters VGC at this year's World Championships.